What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist, revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. What happens? You're about to find out. It's another episode of Notes from an Artist.
It ain't no big thing to wait for the bell to ring. Uh-oh, catch that buzz. Love is the drug I'm thinking of. David, my co-host has just collapsed, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry.
I'm a victim of circumstance.
We welcome our listener back.
What was that, Shakespeare?
Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio.
That was Shakespeare. Shakespeare's sister. We welcome our listener back to another British royalty episode of Notes from an Artist, and I will explain that in a minute. I am your host, Tom Semioli, along with my co-host, David C. Gross. David, say hello to our audience member.
Hooray! Hello, Karen.
Hello, Karen. Now, I mentioned British royalty because back in 2023, David, if you can remember back that far, we had bassist Yolanda Charles on the show, who was awarded the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, the MBE, for her services to the British music industry. Yolanda, the renowned bassist and educator. Now, shortly after our interview, David, tonight's guest was awarded the OBE, the Officer of the Order of the British Empire, for his services to music as well. Now, let me explain that. The British Empire has the MBE, the OBE, and the CBE, which is the commander of the British Empire. Those were created by your favorite king, King George V, to honor people who have made invaluable contributions in non-military roles. So tonight, David, our OBE guest is a bona fide rock and roll icon, Phil Mazanera, who the world knows as the guitarist and composer with Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ensemble Roxy Music.
I am the CNFA.
What does the CNFA do?
I'm the commander of Notes from an Artist.
Yes, he is. And I'm the OBE. I'm an oboe.
That's it. You are double-reeded.
I'm a double-reeded instrument. Now, Phil has penned his autobiography, Revolución, to Roxy, which is available now in print and digital formats, and beautifully designed by Wordsworth Books, I might add. This is a self-published book, and so we advise you to go to Phil's website, Manzanera.com, to buy a copy. You have all sorts of bundles available, David. You can get autographed copies, you can get copies with a CD, and other merch. It's well worth your entertainment euro. And Phil continues to lead an extraordinary life as a recording and performing artist. This is much more than a Roxy memoir.
This is a fantastic book. You would think Ian Fleming wrote this.
Yes, right. It's a James Bond.
Tom, maybe you should let them know who Ian Fleming was. He wasn't Flemish.
He was not. He was the James Bond writer. James Bond created James Bond.
Exactly.
Anyway, Phil recalls his adventures with his family in Cuba, Venezuela, Hawaii, and his musical collaborations with span Brian Eno, David Gilmour, Bob Dylan, his solo bands, including my favorite, 801, and any record with Phil Mazanera in the credits is essential listening.
And besides that, one of the most wonderful things was the story he told us about Jay-Z and Kanye West.
Oh, yeah.
I won't go any further, but it's just an amazing story. And it also showcases how screwed up the record business really, really is. And for whatever you think, oh, it's an open platform, everyone's streaming. Let me tell you something. There is still a record business out there, and they let you know it.
They let you know it, right. Really hasn't changed that much. Phil talks about his career as a producer and also future plans with Andy Mackay and Paul Thompson of Roxy Music. They're going to be creating some new music, so Phil gives us a little preview of that. Roxy's so incredibly influential to my generation of 70s rockers, as was 801. David, one of our colleagues, Larry Hyman, has a repertory ensemble that performs every year at the Bowery Electric, and they always include 801 material. Another colleague of ours, Sal Maida, was one of many bassists to serve in Roxy Music, and when we mentioned Sal, we got a big smile from Phil, and you can see that on our behind-the-scenes video on our YouTube channel. I love that Phil is quoted as saying in our interview and in the book that Roxy Music was a summation of their inadequacies, and they did consider themselves to be inspired amateurs. Great approach to a career.
Yes, and I think that NFAA, Notes from an Artist, is certainly a culmination of our inadequacies just as well.
Yes, it is.
Here, we're right up there with Phil.
Yes, it's a celebration of our
I found
inadequacies.
interesting. Here's a few things I wrote down that I thought were very, very interesting. His stories with Jack Bruce are very, very interesting. You'll see and hear those. His confrontation with a cigar is also a very interesting thing. And I forgot to mention when we were talking that my very first and last cigar I smoked with John DeLorean after he got out of prison. And it was very, very an interesting moment in time as I'm puffing on this cigar, turning completely green.
Why do you have so many children? Because I like my wife. I like my cigar too, but I take it out sometimes.
Another thing that I think is really important and extraordinarily entrepreneurial about great musicians and how they operate is Phil had a mission statement. Phil was an extraordinarily entrepreneurial musician, and it shows through his entire lifetime.
Absolutely. And don't forget, folks, we have a playlist at the end of our show, which we will discuss after we talk to Phil. But David, let's do the plugs. You, the audience member, may be listening to David and myself every Monday night on Cygnus Internet Radio. Let me spell that, CYGNUS. You cue that up on the internet browser of your choice.
And we leave the last S off for
savings.
saving.
www.cygnusradio.com. You, Karen, the audience member, may be listening to us on our Notes from an Artist podcast, streaming right this very second on Apple and wherever podcasts are pontificated. And if you want to win friends and influence your neighbors or not, go to our YouTube page. Oddly enough, Notes from an Artist, where you can enjoy behind-the-scenes video clips. That's right, our guests getting undressed and all sorts of other. So that's our YouTube page. And you can log on to www.notesfromanartist.com to keep up with whatever we're doing at any given moment. So let's bring in our guest. Welcome, Phil Mazanera.
Let's officially welcome Phil to the show. He is a recording artist. He's a performing artist. He's a producer. He's a composer. He's a band leader. He's a band member. He's a musical director. He's a conceptualist. He's good at organizing things. And in his spare time, he was a guitarist for one of the most influential, groundbreaking, and quite fashionable music collectives in the history of pop music, Roxy Music. Nice work if you can get.
Well, that's exactly why I wrote this memoir, was to try and make sense of what the hell happened, how I'm here, obviously 52 years later since I started with Roxy, and obviously 500 years where my family came. There's trying to make sense of what this is. A lot of people, when they get to my age, they sort of, what's this all about? How did I get here? What the hell? Who are those people? My cousins, you want to tell your grandchildren, your children, your grandchildren. And, like a lot of people, you think, oh, when my parents were alive, I wish I'd asked them more questions about what happened, where we came from, what happened back then. Of course, I didn't, like a lot of people. So this is an attempt also for my children, grandchildren, cousins to work out for ourselves a bit of what happened.
The title of the book is, and let's see if I can pronounce this. I went on YouTube to learn how to pronounce Revolution?
Correct. Well
or is
done.
it Revolution?
Revolution?
To Roxy. That's the easy part. You like that, David? Did I distinguish? Now, if you go in the West Village, David, and you say Revolution, a little bit means something different.
I would think so.
Wonderful book out now on Away with Media. This book, Phil, reads like an adventure film screenplay. I mean, if you took this to Hollywood, they turn it down. They say this could never happen to one person. It's Phil Manzanera and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's Phil from Cuba with Love. This is a James Bond book.
Great. Well, it has all those elements in it, and trying to work out, it's just a series of my stories that I would tell when I did interviews. And then eventually some guy said, why don't you put it in a book? And then 7 years later, it's appeared, in a book because being a sort of fiercely independent type person, both from musically and from a business point of view, I didn't want to go to a publisher and ask permission to do it. I just wanted to do it and then to self-publish, see what happened. So it's been a learning experience along the way. I have had my own independent sort of record label since 1989. So I know about producing stuff independently. And I thought, what I realized, though, when I delved into this world of publishing is how much I appreciate people who write books, what they have to go through. My estimation of novelists is just like off the chart. And everybody does books. Also, I've discovered that there is an industry that pays worse than the music industry. It's the publishing industry. How do they get away with it? I do not know. It is, I mean, we thought we were bad off musicians, you know, but my God, how do you pay the rent if you're a writer? It's also, the other thing I discovered for myself was that how unfair it is between writers, novelists, and musicians, because writers have a lot of work to do. If it's a novel, they're creating the story, they're writing beautiful prose and a storyline and all sorts of stuff like that. It takes them ages. They have editors and all that in their publishing houses. And then people read it and they love it, but they maybe read it twice, but hardly ever. They just read it once. Musicians write something in like 10 minutes or 15 minutes. 50 years later, people are still playing it. And you think, wow, that's so unfair. Geez, I love writers. Every time I find a writer now, I say, you guys, you're the best. I mean, like, give them a hug. I feel bad.
Well, David and I made a living as a television news writer for 20 years, and that's how you pay the bills, just like there are musicians that do studio work, right? So that's what I did. David's written, how many, 18 books, David? Is that all?
18 books, yeah.
18.
And good studio work, so there you go.
They were both bass players. David and I are bass players. It's remarkable. I love in the first page of the book where it says, does the world really need another rock star memoir? So when I look at your family, like your dad, the undercover agent, your grandfather was an Italian opera musician, your ancestors were Caribbean pirates, being a rock star is kind of boring compared to what they...
It is. That's why I thought Sex and Drugs. I've read that already.
Yeah.
There's so many great rock with Sex and Drugs. That's not going to go anywhere. I think I've got a few more. I need to do some funny stories, and story. But now when I talk about it, I think it sounds as if I'm making this up. I really, believe me, guys, this actually is for real. Although when you know about history and how subjective history is, and then you start saying, well, hang on, did Henry I really exist in England? Or does that just become some construct from somewhere? And you try and analyze it and say, this is all made up stories. And a lot of it was made up in like the 19th century. The other day someone told me about the Viking. Well, the Vikings never had horns on their helmets. Our image of Vikings with horns on it, there's no horns on a Viking. That was just totally made up in the 19th century.
Well, I must tell you that I'm extremely naive when I read someone's biography. I sort of take it as true. So obviously, if there was a Henry IV, there had to be a Henry III, a second, and a first. It would only go well. I mean, that's my math ability. But it really was fascinating. What was interesting to me, growing up in Manhattan, growing up in New York City, and there you are in Cuba, and there's Khrushchev. And I know that exact time period with the Cuban Missile Crisis.
На данном высоком собрании Организации Объединенных Наций.
So either you were a great historical researcher or it actually happened. So I figured it must have actually happened, because why would anyone really care to read about the Cuban Missile Crisis?
No, totally. And the sort of validation that I constantly get, for instance, at Christmas, I decided to watch Godfather Part 2 again.
You all know Michael Corleone, and we all remember his father. At the time of my retirement or death, I turn over all my interest in the Havana operation to his control.
And I had forgotten that in Godfather Part 2, there is a whole section set in Havana exactly when I was there during the revolution and the night where the dictator Batista fled. And in the film, they're in the presidential palace. They're having the New Year's Eve ball. They're all dressed up. They've all got the military stuff on. And a guy comes in, beautifully set, designed, and in the film and gives them the message that Che Guevara and Camilo Cienfuegos have got to Santa Clara and they're heading for Havana. So they've got to like get the hell out of town. So it's hilarious. They all, immediately run down out of the palace, jump in their big like 50s cars and go whizzing off. Now, if the camera was able to sort of pan up above the presidential palace and move over to the right 3 miles and then come down, they would see us, me, my mum, my sister, on the bathroom floor, a gun battle going from between our guard and the chief of staff of the dictator, bullets flying everywhere, my mum pressing our faces on the floor, her screaming, very sort of, obviously she was from Barranquilla, Colombian, Latino. We're like 10 minutes from the military airfield where all those cars were going to take off, turn down. They wanted to go to Miami. They would turn down the American government. They go to Santo Domingo, taking half of the sort of Bank of Havana's, or Bank of Cuba's money and gold with them on the plane. So I watched that. I said, oh, this is like a head job. I can see what was happening now on film in there. And at the same time, I watched this other film called Our Man in Havana, which was filmed 3 months after that day in Havana in black and white with Noel Coward and Alec Guinness as the main protagonists. And I suddenly realized if I forget about the main characters and I look behind, I can see what Havana looked like when I was there. All the streets, and I start looking to recognize a place called the Malecon and all stuff like that.
But the most unusual agent of them all was our man in Havana, a very likable chap in a most unlikely situation.
Frankly, when they asked me to be their man in Havana, I had no idea of how a spy spies. But I had reasons for being willing to learn, and they were anxious to teach me.
In my mind, I'm getting sort of validation. And Our Man in Havana film is a hilarious film. It's a very funny film where Noel Coward is an MI6 Secret Service guy recruiting Alec Guinness, who sells Hoovers, but they're 2 Brits. And of course, that was written by Graham Greene, who worked for our MI6, exactly when my dad was there in the office 100 yards from his hotel. 2 Brits, tall Brits, stick out like a sore thumb. The middle of Havana is a small center, actually. There's no way that those guys weren't going out and having a mojito in Oscar Hemingway's bar around the corner. So it's sort of, sometimes I think, am I making this up? And then speak to my sister, I speak to my brother, elder brother, I watch the films, I think, and we are still investigating. But all the MI5 files, they haven't been opened. Yeah. There's no freedom of information possibility there. MI5, yeah, that's the British internal one. MI6 is the foreign one. It's still all closed down. Can't really find out. So this whole thing in this book, it's a series of like discoveries. And apart from then you get to the standard stuff where you talk about Roxy, about Dylan, about Pink Floyd, but yeah, these other things, to me, I'm still on a journey.
It's funny because when I was reading that, it brought to mind when my grandmother came here from Russia, she would tell stories. My great-grandfather was the furrier to the Tsar.
Wow.
And she was literally on her dad's shoulders watching the revolution, the Russian Revolution go by before she came to America. So I identified completely with what was going on with you.
Totally, 100%. When you have the ability to go back in your family's history, and let's face it, in America, there must be so many people who came from Europe and have that legacy of historical legacy to discover. And it is sort of fundamental to you knowing who you are and why you are what you are and what are in your genes.
Yeah.
Your blue jeans, obviously. Your jeans.
Not in your dungarees, in your jeans.
There's so many observations that we found fascinating. And one of the things that struck me is your commentary that rock and roll didn't catch on at first in South America, in particular Caracas, where you were, because they already had sexy music to dance to.
Totally. I mean, obviously, I've tried to work that out for myself because I've ended up recording a lot of what they call rock en español, and artists from Argentina, Colombia, blah, blah, and finding out from them, who are younger than me, how they got into rock and roll and stuff like that. But when I was there, pretty much all of the 60s, there was no big British invasion or you had in America or anything like that. Because, the music was for dancing. Salsa, cumbia, Cuban music when I was there in Havana in the 50s. This was sexy dance music with a strong beat that was part of culture and a part of the life. So when you think about the kind of pop music that evolved in the 50s and the early 60s, very lightweight in the groove department, most of it. I mean, obviously, we gradually get James Brown and all those kind of people. And,
the Motown.
Yeah, Motown. And that gradually emerges. And then eventually disco hits big and it's like there's a lot of dancing going on. Before that, there was the twist and stuff. But it's all a bit limp. It's not like raunchy sort of.
However, Phil, the twist in original form was a filthy record.
You
what
mean
Hank Ballard and the Midnighters had sort of described was different than what Chubby Checker did. Absolutely.
Okay, well, maybe in New York, where that's obviously the center of like groove for city, but what reached South America was just wimpy sort of tick, 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 tick. No bottom end, no like ability to grab your partner. Just think of the tango, just think of all about sexy dancing, salsa, cumbia, It comes from Africa, let's face it.
Yeah. Well, again, you look at the Latin influence in rock music, certainly the work you did, but, Richie Valens, Carlos Santana, it's almost the rock music lent itself to those type of rhythms and harmonies. And of course, that came along later on.
It did. But of course, we know that the famous percussionist who came to New York from Cuba had enormous effect on the Duke Ellington Band and Count Basie Orchestra and everything in the late 50s and early 60s on jazz. Because really the groove was like a foreign groove to musicians, because when what they call the tumbao is an implied sort of rhythm that everyone has in their mind and they all play to, but it's not expressed in the same sort of way of 4/4 playing and straight sort of groove playing. It's so much more complicated, and of course it comes from West Africa, and it comes from the way they used to talk to each other through percussive things and ritualistic things. So when that arrives in jazz, they go, wow, what's that? What beat are you playing on? How do we follow? So anyway, I digress. That's not in my book.
Well, that's all part of the show, is about digressing. You also mentioned the inspiration of pirate radio, and we've talked to many of your peers, and how important that was to you growing up.
Well, when I begged my parents to send me to England from Venezuela when I was like 9 to a boarding school in South London, all the kids were listening on a little transistor radio to a radio station called Radio Luxembourg. That was based in Luxembourg. And that's the only place where you could hear alternative kind of songs to what was being played on the very square BBC channels. So there was only like one channel called the Light Program and then a classical thing. And then obviously you get pirate radio stations, and that begins the whole evolution of DJs, and a famous DJ, John Peel, and people like that, really into weird, different music.
This is Radio Luxembourg, the great 208, the ring-a-ding swinging station of the stars.
And it wasn't like America, where there's loads of local radio stations and FM stations and everything. It was very narrow, where you could hear music right up until when we started with Roxy. There was only one program on television, and you had to get on that program to get known. By then, by the 70s, there were a couple earlier in the 60s, Ready, Steady, Go, which were great. But they didn't carry on through. Us and Bowie knew we had to get on to Top of the Pops to make it somehow.
Yes, it's number one. It's Top of the
Were reflecting on your playing, it was very interesting. David and I are bass players, and we did study formally. David, you went to Berkeley, and I went to a place called the University of Miami, which is a lot warmer than Berkeley. A lot sexier, I'll have to say. But that's another story.
Boston was kind of cool.
Boston was kind of cool. But you made a conscious effort not to play too technically. And
exactly.
that's pretty daring, given at that time, prog rock and jazz rock were exploding. So, and those players had chops, but you found a way to distinguish yourself.
Well, quite frankly, I realized, when I was sort of came to England and I started learning, and kids at school would teach me how to play stuff, bits and pieces. And at that time, the big thing was like copying someone like, for instance, Hendrix or Cream. You'd slow the vinyl down and try and hear. I would do that, and people would come up and say, "You're playing it wrong," all the time. After a few years of that, I thought, I'm going to make a virtue out of this. I'm going to and luckily it meant that I created my own sort of combination style by not being through my inadequacies. And I always say that the whole Roxy sound, which our unique sound, whether it's Eno, me, Andy Mackay, and Brian Ferry, is the summation of all our inadequacies. The fact that we weren't technically brilliant, but little bits that we all added together created a special musical world for this guy with a weird voice to inhabit, Brian Ferry. So that whole idea of a musical context was very much in my mind. But I think about technique was that I decided when I was 16 or 17, okay, I didn't want to just play scales. I wanted to spread out learning and playing the guitar for the whole of my life. So I wanted to do it gradually. Now, you may say that I'm just a lazy MF, whatever, I couldn't be asked to do that. And there's probably an element of truth in that. But when I discovered that I really liked sound textures more than a flurry of notes, I thought, this is the area I'm going down. And of course, once I left school and everything, and I eventually got into Roxy, very good friends with Eno. So, we both liked textural stuff. So with the equipment that was available at the time, we went on an adventure of creating soundscapes, if you like. So it took one away, from technical stuff, but also it took you away from just regurgitating blues inflected stuff. And obviously jazz was not going to work in Roxy. And also we had a producer who had worked with George Martin and the Beatles. So I was instructed in the Abbey Road School of Beatles type production of part playing, if you like, and making each little part be worth its weight, and have its place and not necessarily get in the way and serve the song. Once you're dealing with songs, with singers and things like that, you have a different thing. It's different from free from jazz or something, where you're having musical conversations with people and you're heading off into unknown territories, which I love as well. I was never able to do that with Roxy. And actually, we are doing that now. Me, Andy Mackay, and Paul Thompson from Roxy a few weeks ago. And it's called Avant Rock. I call it Avant Rock. The reason I call it Avant Rock is because that was the ad that I answered in the Melody Maker to join the band. It said guitarist wanted for Avant Rock group. And when I saw that recently, I thought, hang on, that was the mission statement. I don't think we ended up doing that. Let's go back and try that. So we're actually trying that now.
David and I enjoyed the AM/PM record. And
that is the beginning of our Avant Rock.
It's interesting because you're taking a compositional approach to the instrument. And of course, technology is coming to the forefront. You had the VCS3 and I think the Revox tape machines.
Yeah.
So, and it was very interesting to learn that you work remotely. You would, at the sessions, you would work out the parts at home and then present them with 4 or 5 different ideas. Very different from the way things are done in studios.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing was that nobody in the band could write a proper song. It wasn't like you look at the film of Let It Be, and you see McCartney riding the long winding road. And he says, I've written this new song, The Long and Winding Road. And you think, Jesus, that guy is just like a genius. He's a proper songwriter. The whole tradition of songwriters, they write a melody and they sing it in some words and they go along. We couldn't do that at all. None of us None. I think maybe once out of 8 albums, someone came with a song with a top line. It was all, here's 3 chords. Just play whatever you want. Let's see what happens. And then we'll give it to the singer. And he's got to go away and try and come up with the top line or some words for it. And it was because that's the only way it could be done. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it was terrible. You wouldn't know till the last moment, and then you had to go on tour, so you're stuck with it, whatever it was. And sometimes we would cheer, take the track Love Is the Drug, did all the music, all the solo, every part of it, gave it to Brian, said, right, off you go. And he came back and had no idea what it was about, called Love Is the Drug, nothing to do with that. And then he came in and said, right, off you go into the singing area. He went in and he sang it, and we all just went, oh my God, thank you, well done, it's a hit. Hey! It could have been a disaster. But
then again, it is almost an improvisational approach, even though you're thinking compositionally, because you're all trying out different things on top of a form. David and I both play in improvisatory ensembles, and David more so than I, because he has more strings on his bass. He has a 6-string bass. I have a 4-string bass. It's almost like group composition.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I do more of a dub thing. He does more of an avant-garde jazz thing. But it changes from moment to moment. But it is a very compositional approach where it's not about the instrument, it's about the ensemble on any given night.
Yeah, and that is a lovely area that we're now exploring with these 3 gigs we did. They were different every night. It was a very small place, 75 people a night. It was in a screening room, actually. So we could use the screen to show images and stuff. And because of screening room, it had like 4 or 5 different speakers sound around speakers. So you could, and the mixing guy was part of the whole ensemble as well. And it was like an experiment, which, to be quite honest, I didn't want to do. Andy forced me to do it. I said, I thought you've given up playing. He said, no, look, we got to play. I said, oh, please, no, because we'd have to rehearse and it's so tiring. And then I had to give in. He said, it's only 75 people. No one will know about it if it's a disaster. I said, it's going to be a complete disaster, but let's do it anyway. By some miracle, we recorded it. You'll be able to hear it. And we filmed one of the nights, all freebies from friends and stuff. And it turned out to be incredibly good. And I said to the audience, well, I've got no idea what this is going to sound. At the end of each number, I said, oh, what was that? I've got no idea what that was. But we all seem to like it. At this point in my life, that's what I want. I want to be happy. I want to do good work. I don't care if it's the biggest thing since sliced bread. I just want to do music. And I'm so pleased that all the people involved with Roxy, whether from Eno and Brian Ferry, and everybody's still doing music, even though, it's not necessarily going to set the world on fire, but it's the core of what we do and what we are. So we're happy to sign out if necessary.
Sound familiar, David? That's kind of what we're doing here in New York.
Yeah. Phil, one of the things that you said earlier is really the crux of everything. And you're looking for a sound. It's not so much the scales or the speed. A funny story. My wife came to see me perform one of my shows. Now, my career is much more, when I was doing it, studio work. I was in a later version of Humble Pie. I was doing all these rock things. When she came to see me play, and I've got this pedal board with Eventide this and
yeah.
So she goes, "You're not playing the bass," and because I'm doing
yeah.
What happened to you? And what I'm trying to accomplish now is sound. And I've got some of the top avant-garde saxophonists and trumpeters. We're searching for something different. And some of the times we're doing it without drums. And it's the sound.
Yeah, it is. And the one thing I say is I realize, also from running pro, is that I'm not afraid to fail. And I think that comes from a sort of, if you like 60s sort of hippy dippy thing of like, there was so much improvisation going on. And in this way that jazz, play a little melody and you go off for half an hour and you come back, play a little melody, just keep everyone happy. And they know it's bookended and it's going to finish. But you were out on an adventure and it might work, it might not. But if you didn't do that, it's never going to be bigger than just what you think first and say, let's just play this. And that is part of the thing of why I'm a musician. Yeah, I was conditioned by all this thing and all that stuff that happened in the 60s and right from the beginning of Miles Davis through to, Cream used to just play a riff they hadn't for a little bit and then go off with all sorts of things, and then come back to the riff. It's same sort of thing, really, as John Coltrane and all those people, the actual structural sort of idea.
Well, you knew Jack well, correct?
I knew Jack very well. I absolutely adored Jack. And one of the funniest things that we did is I invited him to come to Cuba because I knew he'd like Cuban music. Right. I said, would you like to come and play in Havana with Cuban musicians? So he said, yeah, great, let's go. I said, but the only problem is it's for the cigar festival. Now, I don't smoke. I said, I'm going to be a complete fraud. I'm there for the ride, typical musician. But we're going to have tryouts of amazing rum. He said, oh, well, Tony Williams taught me how to smoke cigars and all that. I said, great, you're on. So we went and we rehearsed with the Cuban band. And obviously, we had to play Cuban version of Sunshine Over Your Love. Well, we had these rehearsals and the guys just really could not play rock. And quite frankly, we can't really play salsa the way they can. So because the groove is so different, as I said, the implied rhythms, they could not, he was getting very frustrated with the fact. I said, look, Jack, forget it, just let them do whatever they want. That really emphasized to me the difference, because most people who start with salsa and cumbia and things can't play rock, because rock is, you need to be on top of the beat, very difficult for them. And we can't play the tumbao type thing. I said, where is the beat? Hang on, you came in there. What's going, what do I latch on to? It's in everyone's collective brain. Too difficult.
Well, it was interesting because we opened for Jack, I guess it was in 89. And the thing that amazed me most wasn't his bass playing. We were both being sponsored at that time by Warwick. He sat down at the piano and this stride piano playing. And I was like, screw your bass playing. Stick to the keyboard. You're amazing.
And also his melodic sense.
Yeah.
The notes he chose when he's singing.
Yeah.
He was quite a unique sort of, and obviously you follow his career from when he first went to the Music Academy in Glasgow, through all the emergent blues scenes in Alexis Corner and Graham Bond organization and all that kind of thing, and then to the Clapton thing period, the Cream period, and his solo albums. He's a very unique sort of musician. I mean, I did get to play Cream numbers with him at Guitar Legends. I got to pretend to be Eric Clapton. Obviously couldn't be, but I did it. That's the irony, is that I end up being told at school that you're playing it all wrong. And I end up playing it with Jack and with Simon Phillips on drums, the most amazing kind of three-piece thing. But yeah, I loved him.
Very funny anecdotes about Jack and, of course, the Dylan concert, which is in the book. One of your colleagues, Phil, is a friend of ours. He sends his regards from Brooklyn, New York. He's one of 16 Roxy Music bass players. Sal Maida.
Sal. Yeah.
Sal is a character. Now, he tells us about his first gig that he did with Roxy in 73. I think you hired him for the Stranded tour, and he said that the first show was a disaster, but Brian said to the band after the gig that, well, at least we're still the best dressed band in the UK. But Sal mentioned this to me, and you state in the book that unlike many British bands, you guys really didn't pay your dues in the traditional manner, like doing the working man's clubs and the bar circuit. And of course, Bob Harris said you were style over substance. Oddly enough, now in a world of X Factor and Britain's Got Talent and Pop Idol, the way Roxy Music did it is kind of the way it's done now in many ways. But that was kind of a hurdle you guys had to overcome.
Well, to be fair, we did consider ourselves inspired amateurs.
Okay.
And once people, quite early on in 1972, when people heard Roxy, and especially when they heard the first album, and they liked it, and we got good reviews. We said, shit, we better do hundreds of gigs because we've got to learn our stagecraft. But to be fair, Brian, Andy, and to a slightly less extent, were a lot older than me and Paul. They're like 4 or 5 years older. So, yeah, they hadn't paid their dues working in clubs, but they had been to university and learnt about other things. Andy did a music degree, Brian Ferry did the fine arts degree with the most famous pop art. And they brought all this extra stuff to us. And as I said, we did think we were inspired amateurs, and nearly all the songs were like 3 chords or something. But then we'd listen to the Velvet Underground, and they were all like 2 chords or 3 chords. And it was about the what goes on top and the musical context. And also one of the, if you like, a mission statement was we want to do present interesting, different music, but in a visually attractive way. All the dressing up was a lot of fun. It was a bit of a laugh, and by coincidence, sort of what they call theatrical lighting only just came on then with Bowie. Yeah. When we supported him in a pub in Croydon, there was these sort of poles with some theatre lightings on it. And it's incredible to believe, but no one else had like theatre lighting in those days.
That aesthetic hadn't come. Of course, you had practice. You dressed up as Zorro as a kid.
Exactly.
So, yeah, no problem.
Some people in my recent talks have said, hang on, that looks a bit like Brian Ferry's outfit in 1974 that he got pilloried for in the New Musical Express. I said, yeah, well, also, I think there was an outfit with some epaulets on it as well. He didn't know. So in some bizarre way, it's all connected.
And interesting, you talk about amateurism. I was fascinated to learn about one of my favorite projects of yours, 801, and how that project was not meant to last. Yet that is one of your more enduring records. This one right here, David. See that? That's a 4-string bass there, David.
I let it go.
And there's actually... Oh, here we go. We're going to show off guitars now.
Oh my God, what is that? How many strings are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? But I've never seen that come. What is that? Where's that from?
A luthier up here. I sort of had him build it that way. You know what they say about big hands, Phil?
They don't say it in England.
Big gloves.
Well, to be fair, Phil, he only slides up and down the E string anyway. So. But also interesting to find out that band was meant to be short-lived. Although you did have 801 do 2 other records, K-Scope, of course. And
the same kind of thing. It was the same sort of people, but the concept was different. Then it became just, I was due to do a solo album. I said, these guys are still here, gone off work with Bowie. So that's why he didn't appear on any of my solo things for another 15 years till he stopped being the Grandmaster Wizzo. Yeah, no, that was 801 has been one of the enduring things. What's great is the bass player on that. Obviously, it was very good of me, I think, in retrospect, to let the bass player, Bill, have his guitar and not the guitarist. I don't know how that happened. He must have hoodwinked me. But Bill has brought out a book, and if you want to know a lot more about 801, because he has like forensic, he writes history books, like 500-600 page history books, one day by his book, because there's a lot more detail about 801 and about recording my solo albums in it that I found fascinating. So
we should get him on the show.
We should. I'm friends with him on the Facebook. So when you look over your career following Roxy and 801, and you seem to have a very entrepreneurial approach to what you do, with collaborating with different artists, opening a studio, taking on the role of musical director. That's not for the faint of heart. Your career has been in constant motion, and it's kind of, to be an artist in the 21st century, you have to be a polymath. You have to do all these different things. And that sort of came natural to you, it seems.
Especially now, young people have to do, here in London, they have to do like 4 different jobs to be able to be a musician. So, yeah, I mean, but I ended up doing all these different things because I realized at a certain point that I wanted to continue to be free. And the whole reason I became a musician was to have freedom, not to be told what to do by the big bosses or the multinationals or anything, to just go on my journey regardless. And so I thought, right, to do that, you have to own the means of production. Okay, I'd read Karl Marx and all that stuff. So, right, I need to get a recording studio. And at the time, my friends were in a band called 10cc, and they'd had their own recording studio. And I lived next door to Kevin Godley. Said, and I had this building. Let's do it together. So we were building a studio together. Then they had to pull out because they got a tax bill. And my manager at the time said, do you want to have no money for 5 years or have a studio? So I said, I want to have a studio because I knew that then I could just go and make records and invite friends to make records, which I did with Robert Wyatt and all and Eno and whatever, and South American musicians, and not have to go and ask permission. So then got my own label. So, right, how do I do this? My friends, the McCormick brothers, said, look, you got a studio, let's do a label. So, it's never just me. It's always collaborations with friends. And so one thing led to another. And then till the bank said, you press one more record, we're taking everything away from you. I said, okay, I give up. And then they invented the internet. So I said, right, how can I restart without it having everything taken away from me? So, yeah, I guess I just was going to do music and meet people and do regardless and find a way. And that's, right up to this book. I did it. We did it ourselves, with Claire, my wife and stuff. I Googled, how do you publish a book? I found a company that would do it and this and that. And so I've sort of been independent, if you like, since 1988.
Well, Wordsworth did a tremendous job on the design of this book. When you take over, when you helm the producer's chair, you find out a lot of things you didn't realize, that you have to cheerlead, you have to be a psychologist, you have to be a disciplinarian.
Yeah.
And then you produced a Latin rock band. So it was interesting to see how you just made the transition from player to producer to entrepreneur to studio owner. I mean, it just seems like just a constant evolution, not a revolution.
Oh, Revolution.
Revolution. Excuse me.
Now that you're mentioning that, yeah, that fits in as well. I haven't thought of that.
Yeah.
That's the next book, Revolution, Evolution.
Well, of course, Bill's brother, the bass player's brother, wrote Revolution in the Head, which was the book about the Beatles, which was very, very under his name, Ian MacDonald. And it's seen as a classic because his approach to how he analyzed the thing was like revolutionary.
So funny in the book, when I opened the first page, it was a quote from Ian MacDonald. And I'm going, oh, my brother-in-law, because Ian from King Crimson, may he rest in peace, was my brother-in-law.
Yeah, they always got mixed up. Obviously, nothing to do with each other. But obviously, I knew about Ian MacDonald because of King Crimson.
Yeah.
Or Foreigner and all that, So, Ian adopted that name as his sort of nom de plume, as they say, for his writing in his books. Unfortunately, he committed suicide. But he was doing the same thing with Bowie, actually, and Bill tells me that there's some of it still left. But he wrote an incredible book on Shostakovich, which Shostakovich is the best book ever written about his father.
One of the stories I'd love for you to tell our listeners is the one about when you, Roger, and David were in, where was it, Colombia? And
Roger Daltrey. No, I thought Roger Waters, really? No. There's things I didn't put in the book, by the way. Okay, so it's 1992 or something. And imagine that in the UK, there's still a bunch of numpty musicians who are just like, someone says, right, let's go party over there. We all go, and it's for free. And you're going to have a great time. Let's do it. So this Colombian bass player, a friend of ours, Chucho Merchan, who had been in the Eurythmics and
fabulous player, yeah,
great guy, said, right, I've had this request that would you come to Cali, Colombia, and do a free concert for the World Environmental Convention or something. They'll pay for all first-class airfares, all the hotels, everything we paid for, and it'll be the first time that any Who songs or Pink Floyd songs are played in South America. So I say, well, yeah, that's fantastic. I want to be part of this. And also, I'm half Colombian, and one of my cousins can fly the plane because he's the captain of Avianca. And so, and the manager of Pink Floyd, Steve O'Rourke, said, right, okay, let's go. And so we rehearse in London, and then we get on the plane, and we're having a great time. And, and we get there. My cousin flies us to Cali, and we get to Cali. And, what was it? What were we thinking? This is the height of the cartel wars between Escobar and the Cali cartel. They were killing each other and like drugs everywhere. And nobody, I don't remember anybody mentioning anything about that. I think my mother, who was still alive at the time, saying, don't ever go back to Colombia, you'll be kidnapped and all this kind of thing. Thinking about it, they could have kidnapped David Gilmour or Roger Daltrey and made a packet out of it. But anyway, we get there, and the next morning we wake up, and on the front page of the Cali newspaper, it says, don't go to the stadium, to the concert. It's a money laundering exercise for the cartel. So Steve O'Rourke, the manager, said, where's Lucho's room? Chucho's room, sorry. They're banging on the door. I'm following Steve. He gets him up against the wall. You're a fantastic bass player, but don't ever organize a concert before again. You know, like, what the hell are we going to do? And so what I have discovered in the last few months, because I went back to Colombia to give a talk, because the Spanish version came out in Cartagena, and the main editor of the El Tiempo said, no, shall I tell you the real story? And of course, I would have put this in the book, but I didn't. The real story is that the Cali cartel owned the football team who played in that stadium. And they hadn't realized when they agreed for this concert to happen that all the punters would be on the grass, on the turf, and they'd spoil the pitch. So they decided to try and stop it by putting out that it was a money laundering exercise. It's like a double bluff. You could not make it up. Anyway, we did the concert to about 100 people, and there's guys with machine guns, all, you know, like protecting everybody. You can see some of it on YouTube. So then the next day, in theory, we're all going to stay for like a week and have a holiday and all that kind of thing. But we leave the hotel and I go to the airport and I'm chased by the concierge of the hotel for not having paid my bill. And I said, well, he gets to the airport and he's like accosting me. I said, look, mate, it was meant to be all expenses paid. I didn't pay for breakfast or something. So my cousin, who's the captain, gets him and says, look, these guys are incredibly famous. What the dickens do you think you're doing? Not in Spanish, dickens. You know. What do you do? Pendejo que estás haciendo? Get out of here. Leave these guys alone. You know, so we get on the plane and leave. And I go to my uncle's house in Bogota, and that's another story in there that's overwhelming for me. There's so many cousins, 50 cousins, and Gilmour and Roger Daltrey, supposedly they're staying for weeks or something. And I suddenly say, I'm leaving straight away. So I go to the airport, I go to the first class compartment, and there they are. I said, what are you guys doing? So we gotta get the hell out of here. You know, this is too dangerous, this place. And they suddenly woke up, you know. And so a bomb went off in the hotel where they were staying the next day. Stuff like that. They could have been. I was talking to David about it a couple of weeks ago. He said, what were we thinking of? You know, and Polly, his wife, said, my God, you took me on that thing. We just started going out then. And like the most dangerous place in the world. Obviously, at the time, subsequent to that, I read all the stories about Escobar and stuff. And we've all watched the TV series. I can't remember what it's called now. The great one that set it.
Well, you know, Phil, Roger's wife, Heather, grew up in this town in Connecticut.
Really?
And Tom and I, through a realtor in town who happens to be Heather's sister-in-law, we did a couple of benefits for Teen Cancer America.
Yeah, right.
And just yesterday, Maria Taylor, the sister-in-law, sold this house. We're buying a house just down the road a piece. And it's just so funny how the lives...
It's a small world, isn't it? Because, actually, funny enough, I did do that record. Well, you wouldn't hear. I can't hear myself on it. Apparently, I played on it. Well, I did. I played on it here. I sent it to Mark and thing, and it was for Teenage Cancer America.
One of the other stories you couldn't make up is all of a sudden this riff from one of my favorite albums, K-Scope, becomes No Church in the Wild with Jay-Z and Kanye. I mean, what are the chances of that?
Well, the chances, statistically, I could win the Grand National, probably a horse in the Grand National with better stats than doing that thing. I mean, and the irony, just the supreme irony, is that to write that track, I'm just watching the TV at home, not concentrating, just going, oh, I've got to do an instrumental the next day. So, that'll do, So I go in the next day and Simon Phillips plays, and then 40 years later, get a call saying they've sampled it, they've slowed it down. Well, they didn't. 88 Keys slowed it down, and it's going to be released the next week. And I'm in a car in Labrador with my son Charlie, and they say, we can't send it to you because it's top secret, but we'll play it to you down the phone. And I say, hang on, people are always getting my name mixed up with Ray Manzanera from The Doors, right? So I think you got the wrong person. He said, no, it's you. I said, don't think so. I'll play it to you. Okay, he played it to me. I said, well, it sort of sounds like me, but it's slowed down. It sounds pretty cool, but I've got no idea how you play. So I said, oh, thanks. Typical musician. Oh, thanks. Bye. And I said, Charlie, do you think this coming out, they're quite famous. What's the deal? No one said anything. So I ring up the people who own the copyright, the Virgin. They said, oh, yeah, we know about it. You'll be happy. I said, well, hang on. What about if it's got some horrible lyric on it that's misogynistic or something? And I'll be tainted with this because who wrote the music? We're coming to get this guy. And they said, no, honestly, don't worry. You'll be happy. You're getting more than they are. I said, well, how can that be? He said, because we've negotiated a third of the publishing, third of the record royalties for you. I said, well, what about the other people? Well, it's a guy from Foreigner who the bass drum or something. And then there's a guy called The Dream, and there's a guy, there was about 11 other people, but apparently, you're getting a third. I said, well, okay, well, fine. And then I thought, well, hang on, I wrote it as well. I'll ring up the publisher. The same thing happened. No, you'll be happy. And so, it came out, and it's the only thing I've been on that's won a Grammy. That was in Gatsby. It was in Denzel Washington film. It was in the Audi, a special car. I can't remember the name of the car. Played during the Super Bowl. The ad. It's like if you go to a casino, got one of those big machines you put in $1 and bing, 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 and it's like having something like that. You go like that, and all these things go do 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 do. You say, wow! And suddenly all this money comes out, and I thought, thank you, God. For all the sort of record companies who haven't paid me royalties, and all those 30 productions I can never find because they've all left and gone somewhere else. Thank you for that. He just said, look, take that because...
Imagine if no one had gotten a hold of you and all of a sudden the check arrives.
Yeah, well, that's another story because it took about 3 or 4 years to get paid.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And I used to say, well, hang on, it's Rockefeller Records, and aren't they owned by Universal or something? So look, mate, the only way to get paid is if you send somebody in with a gun and say, give me the money, and they just open the drawer and say, okay, yeah, here it is. Yeah.
The Peter Grant method.
Interesting with sampling, we had Ron Carter on the show. I think, David, Ron revealed to us that he has an attorney that does nothing but track down all the times he's been sampled. And Ron's attitude is fabulous. He says, if you called me, I'd have given you something better. So
and cheaper. And cheaper.
Most musicians, they sort of care, but don't really care unless they're thinking about how can I pay this bill or their children's education or something. But most people say, well, I'll just write another song or I'll just do another. They're always looking forward. You waste all your time trying to track down people who owe you money in Argentina or something. You're never going to do something new and you're not going to be happy. So that is the kind of a lot of musicians. However, but I hope that things will improve. Although, having said that, since they invented record companies at the beginning of the 20th century, the whole history of record companies and sort of managers and artists is the artists get screwed over. But hey, you just got to get on, do what you do.
But I just think the irony of all of this is that you don't own your own stuff.
Yeah.
And, you'll be happy, but don't bother us.
Yeah. It's morally wrong. It's morally wrong that you don't own your copyrights, even if they keep it for a certain amount of time and just automatically give it back. And that needs legislation, and especially in Europe and England. I mean, there is a certain amount of that in America. If you catch a certain little window, which they don't really make very obvious and public, and you somehow ask for it back. But it's wrong as a concept. And now, who thought that was a good idea? Not the artists.
Right. Digital distribution now, I mean, you can be an entrepreneur and have your own label like you did. We spoke to one of your colleagues, Steve Vai, and he did it 40 years ago. Rather than give away his first record, Flexible, he says, start my own label and I'll make my own distribution deal. Now, of course, he had the name recognition from Frank Zappa, and then who was it? David Lee Roth, I think it was. Yeah. So he certainly had that, and of course, you have the name recognition from Roxy Music. So you probably had a leg up on everyone else, but
but ultimately it's down to the music. You do a great piece of music, it will do it for you. And so there's 120,000 songs released every day or something on Spotify or something. They're not all good songs. Certain songs have beautiful melody or beautiful resonance in the lyrics that reach people and connect, and a lot of them don't. And it's a bit like selection of the fittest, really. The songs sort of self-select themselves. But given even that, it is extra difficult now to be heard with young people. It's not going to change when I'm alive.
Right. And we've discussed this at length. And you have to go out and you have to perform. I mean, that's where...
But then everybody has to do that. So there's... And one of the problems here in the UK is that there isn't that circuit that we all went on when we started off pubs and clubs, small, 50 people or something. You know, that gig I said with Bowie and Roxy, there were 50 people there in a pub. It doesn't exist anymore.
We still fight that same situation where there's fewer and fewer places to perform. I guess COVID had a great deal to do with it.
Oh, sure it did.
Recently.
Yeah.
But even before then, there was an issue with it. And then also with touring, the whole insurance angle with COVID.
Right, the liability, you know that, yeah.
Yeah.
Quarantining and the this and the that, it's terrible.
Yeah, and also in the UK, it's extra difficult because we had Brexit, and it meant that it's very difficult to go and play in Europe because there's so many forms to fill in for every single country and going in and out that people just don't bother at the moment. And because I thought, oh, great, with our AM, PM thing, let's go and play in Barcelona, and then we'll play in Stockholm. And then I thought, oh, actually, you can't because it's just... They've made it so difficult, and that's the bit of self-harm that the UK did when they voted themselves out of Europe was just incredible stupidity.
Phil, lastly, your Portuguese citizenship, have you become...
Well, I tell you what, obviously I've written the book by the time I investigated this, so I went to Curacao. I went to Cartagena in Colombia to do the Hay Festival, Literary Festival, for my Spanish version of the book and everything. But I also went there so we could go to Curacao. Curacao is one of the Dutch Antilles. My grandmother was born there. My great-grandmother, my great-great-great-grandmother, and blah, blah, blah. You keep going back.
Zilla Cohen, right?
Yeah. And they came there from Holland in the 16th century and then originally expelled out of Sephardic Jews expelled out of Spain in 1492. So in order to get your Portuguese, because I'd read in the Times newspaper that if you could prove you had any Sephardic Jewish ancestry, you could apply for a Portuguese passport or a Spanish passport at that time. And of course, with Brexit, so pissed off about Brexit, get a passport so I can go to Europe easily. So scroll forward to this January, we go there, and my daughter from New York, Sophie, she comes down, and on my birthday, we book a tour of Jewish cemeteries in search of the gravestones of my relatives. And we found them. And so we then go to the public records there and get a notarized certificate, because that's what you have to do.
Okay.
Buried in a Jewish cemetery. So I now have this certificate that any of my 50 cousins or my children who want to apply for Portuguese citizenship now know how to get that. And I've got the WhatsApp thing of the notary in Curacao and all that. So it continues. The only thing that my wife pointed out is that's all very well for you. You might get the passport, but she won't. So she'll have to be in the other queue, and that's not going to work.
No, it certainly
why
wouldn't.
are you doing it, mate?
Amazing stuff. Anyway, Phil, thank you for being our guest. And Phil, can we get a PSA from you? My name is Phil Mazanera, and you're listening to Notes from an Artist.
Okay, let's try. I always screw this up. I've been screwing this up for 50 years. Why do you call it a PSA? Personal...
public service announcement. Yeah.
Okay, this is a public service announcement.
Or please stop asking.
My name is Phil Mazanera, and I'm really, really happy to have been talking to Notes from an Artist.
It's good. And almost as dramatic as Jarl Wobble.
Jarl Wobble is an amazing guy.
We've had him on the show, and he's coming to New York, so we're going to be hanging out with him.
Yeah, what a trajectory is that man. Yeah, he's responsible for some great stuff.
Yeah, so he is a cat. And we're going to take him for pizza at Arturo's on Houston Street.
Nice chat to you guys.
Thank you. And we'll save you a seat at Arturo's. We'll order cannoli for you.
For whatever they call it, the one with the salami on the hot pepperoni on top. Yeah,
I'm trying to teach David how to pronounce these things. Kapakol and Shwuyadel. He's having a problem with Kalamad. What do you say, David?
Keelamiri.
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 Anyway. All right, Phil, be well. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
David, a fantastic interview with Phil Mazanera. That's a real bucket list one for me. I was a big Roxy Music fan. And again, I certainly admire Phil's approach to the art of making music in so many different ways that he does. So a lot of fun to have Phil on the show. Let's talk about the playlist, David. What do you got queued up for us?
Lots of music, but the hard thing is to try and pick 4 songs of Roxy for Phil. And one that I left out that I really didn't want to leave out, but I just didn't have time to put in, is a tune called Slave to Love. One of my dear friends who passed away, a guy named Jimmy Malin, was the percussionist on that record. And when he and I were working with Stephen Stills, he told me the story that in the chorus, when they say slave to love, you hear this big boom. Slave to love. And he told me what he did is he put a pickup in a water bottle, one of those big 5-gallon water jugs, and then they just reverbed it out and it went boom every time. And whenever I hear that record, it makes me smile, and I remember what a wonderful person Jimmy Malin actually was.
That's right. And also, don't forget, one of your other colleagues was on that record, Neil Jason. That's Neil doing the bass part.
That's true.
All right, nice little reggae groove in that one. So we'll get that on the show one of these days.
Yeah. So let me give you an idea of what we got. Well, we were talking about at the very beginning some of Phil's influences. So I decided to put in an Astor Piazzolla tune, one of the greatest tango stars of Argentina. He also liked Charlie Parker. So we put that in. We have 4 different Roxy tunes, one called Remake, Remodel, Do the Strand, Love is the Drug, which you so elegantly articulated at the beginning of our intro. Dance Away, which is a fabulous tune. Then 4 tunes by Phil. One was my favorite tune off of the 801 record, Tomorrow Never Knows. Then his tune, Baby's on Fire, Magdalena, and Lady of the Lake. Then we put in this one-off by a band he was in, Wyatt's Son. And I just love the title, Mummy, and that's M-U-M-M-Y, was an asteroid. I wish we would have talked to him about that title.
Next time.
Then he was producer, guitarist, and friend with David Gilmour. So we have Take a Breath, Then I Close My Eyes, Rattle That Lock, and today we have a Godly Cream song. Godly Cream were originally 10cc, and I thought it was apropos to do an Englishman in New York. Next, we have Split Ends and 3 tunes by Pink Floyd. There you have it. What a set list.
What a set list. What a great guest. My name is Tom Semioli. Thanks for listening. You, sir.
I'm David C. Gross, and we'll see you next week. And we have a fabulous interview with a guy named John Burlingame. And he wrote a book, and it's all about Henry Mancini, jazz in TV in the 50s, Peter Gunn, and it's a fascinating take on early TV and radio.
All right.
So hopefully we will see you next Monday, and you guys take care.